Oh, yeah. Looking at you. You're looking at me. Hey there to everybody live on Twitter, Periscope, live on Facebook Live, live on YouTube Live, and live on this Tuesday, listening to us, whether you're listening to us on radio, on stream, or listening to us at your convenience on the Spreaker podcast and progressive radios. And there's so many places that we're carried. And we're glad to have you with us, whether you're listening or you're watching today. Happy Tuesday. Just made it to my home studio by the skin of my teeth. Lines at the post office so long these days. But let's get to it. We've got a great show in store, a wonderful guest. Of course, you being a part of it makes it even more wonderful and more special. But let's start it off with a little thing we like to call Ripped from sharing some audio today of some current events and things that have come up. We wanted to share with you President Trump's remarks on Kyle Rittenhouse. Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary, was asked questions about him. She said the president had no response about Kyle Rittenhouse, but the president changed his tune. Kyle Rittenhouse, if you're not familiar with the name, is the 17-year-old supporter of Donald Trump, who was charged with murdering two protesters just last week in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Take a listen.
It was a supporter of yours, Mr. President, who killed someone that is accused of killing two people. It's a supporter of yours.
Saying, are you going to condemn the actions of vigilantes like Kyle Rittenhouse?
We're looking at all of it. That was an interesting situation. You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. And it was something that we're looking at right now, and it's under investigation. But I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been. He probably would have been killed. But it's under investigation.
Do you think private citizens should be taking guns?
I'd like to see law enforcement take care of everything.
Well, the president obviously defending Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, because Kyle Rittenhouse defends him. Look, I've seen this numerous videos from numerous angles, and anyone is innocent in this country to proven guilty. You have a constitutional right to due process. So does Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, I saw. This is just my opinion. Somebody, the first person he shot, I would say if I were a juror, I could maybe buy self-defense, but not the second and the third. And the reason is a skateboard's not a gun, and the people chasing him after the first shooting were chasing him because they're like, hey, he's the shooter. The other problem is the type of weapon, crossing state lines, his age, having that weapon, organizations that he's been associated with online, and his intention, motivation, and purpose for coming to the state. You know, I post. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. This is a 17-year-old, and I, as a mom, I have to say, I know some people don't agree with me. This is a child, and if you look at the parents, you know, there's plenty of things that a child is indoctrinated with, whether it's things they see and hear in the home with the parent or parents, guardians, things that they see or hear on television, online. Add a weapon to the mix, and it's a recipe for what we've seen, which is, like I said, in my opinion, a disaster. I feel that we as a society have failed this child. And I feel that the parents of this boy have failed this child. And again, we don't need these types of weapons, and we certainly don't need these types of weapons in the hands of kids. Look, I'm not against you owning a gun. A lot of Democrats own guns. People think that's something just Republicans have. But I'm not comfortable having a weapon in my house. I'm terrified that my child would get their hands on it and would become yet another statistic themselves. God forbid somebody in my household or somebody in your household who happens to be visiting me. Well, the president defended Kyle Rittenhouse, but now we have condemnation. There were condemnation, by the way, to Joe Biden from the right all the time, and Donald Trump, saying Joe Biden doesn't condemn. Democrats don't condemn the violence. Well, Joe Biden did, in fact, specifically, and he did before, but here again, specifically, unequivocally, condemning those turning peaceful protest violent. And he also criticized the president's handling of this violence overall. Take a listen.
Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. And those who do it should be prosecuted. Violence will not bring change. It'll only bring destruction. It's wrong in every way. It divides instead of unites, destroys businesses, only hurts the working families that serve the community. It makes things worse across the board, not better. No, it's not what Dr. King or John Lewis taught, and it must end. Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build. This president, long ago, forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it. You know, he may believe mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is.
Well, that's a very good point. Former Vice President and Democratic nominee Joe Biden condemning peaceful protests turning violent and criticizing the president's handling of the violence by not calling out his supporters. Remember, there's radical left fringe violence, radical right fringe violence. You know, people think, oh, I'm going to take sides. No, I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm going to be honest. I'm a realist. I'm a Democrat. I'm a liberal. I'm a progressive, but I'm a realist. And there is violence on both sides. Let's take a listen to the president now, comparing the police to golfers who miss putts. Missing putts is the same as shooting a human being, taking a life. Not in my life. Listen.
The police are under siege because of things. They can do 10,000 great acts, which is what they do, and one bad apple or a choker. You know, a choker. They choke. Shooting the guy in the back many times. I mean, couldn't you have done something different? Couldn't you have wrestled? You know, I mean, in the meantime, he might have been going for a weapon, and, you know, there's a whole big thing there. But they choke. Just like in a golf tournament, they miss a 3-foot putt.
Wow. I'm sorry. I really have nothing to say. I I have nothing to say on that. Golf ball in a hole, bullet in a human being's back, face, chest, life taken away. Golf score is not as good as it would have been because you missed a shot. Ridiculous. But not ridiculous. Sad and sickening. Let's rip another. An uncle of Jacob Blake, a black man reported to be partially paralyzed from the waist down after being shot at close range in the back by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, not a golf game, accused President Trump of drumming up violence in the country and said the Blake family does not want anything to do with him. Jacob Blake's uncle, who was Justin Blake, was asked about unrest in Kenosha and other parts of the country following the police shooting of his nephew and the violence seen at demonstrations. Mr. Blake said, quote, "Our nephew was shot 7 times in the back. Nothing could justify that. We don't have any words for the orange man. All I ask is that he keep his disrespectful, foul language away from our family, far away from our family." How could they not be feeding on violence when the man in the White House is steadily drumming it up? Did you not think it would not trickle down to the streets? It has. This is something that he said, I quoted there, an interview from local ABC affiliate WISN. He continues, quote, "So we have the opportunity to control the narrative as the Blake family, and we're going to do that." Let's rip another. Well, there are people that said, where is Dr. Anthony Fauci? Well, the White House coronavirus advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, actually has emerged. He debunked online theories promoted by the president himself that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has changed its guidance for tallying coronavirus deaths, showing a fraction of total COVID fatalities. On Sunday, Twitter removed a post retweeted by the president that claimed the CDC had quietly updated its guidance to indicate only 6% of the country's coronavirus death toll, roughly 9,000 deaths, caused by the virus, according to a report from CNN. The tweet said that the remaining 94% had other serious illness. Well, Dr. Fauci told the ABC program Good Morning America today that the CDC guidance, last updated on August 26th, just days ago, indicates that of the people who have died from the virus, a certain percentage of them had nothing else but the virus, COVID-19. However, people with underlying illnesses also die from COVID-19. So in other words, if you have bronchitis and get COVID-19, the bronchitis didn't kill you, the COVID-19 did. But of course, you could have more than one thing. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. That's what's ripped from the headlines.
If you're worried your friend may be struggling, remember, you don't have to be there to be there.
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You could write them a text or knit them a sweater. If you can't be together, you could write them a letter. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking. You could chat on the game, kick off your flip-flops. You can ask on your couch while you binge watch. However you do it, you gotta ask a friend. And if they don't share, you can ask again. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and the JED Foundation.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the Battle of Blair Mountain raged in Logan County, West Virginia. Members of the United Mine Workers of America were attempting to organize the minefields in the southern part of the state. The efforts to bring workers to union was met with violent resistance. The miners armed themselves and marched south. As many as 10,000 miners joined the march. They met armed company men at Blair Mountain. In the battle that ensued, 1 million rounds were fired. The mine owners even hired private planes to drop bombs on Union miners. The U.S. Army intervened and the battle ended. Despite not being successful in their march, the bloody battle brought national attention to the violence in the coal fields. But that was not the last battle for Blair Mountain. In 2011, there was a proposal to bring mountaintop removal mining to Blair Mountain. This type of mining blasts off large chunks of a mountain surface to get at the coal seams below. Protesters stood against the proposal. They argued it would be environmentally devastating to the area. They also argued that it would blast away one of the most important sites of labor history in the nation. Some coal miners took exception to the protests. In a CNN documentary on the conflict, one union miner said, quote, "Mountaintop removal is what built this house, sends that little girl to school, provides insurance for my wife." But another miner joined in the protest against removal. He told CNN that miners had been, quote, "brainwashed to think, oh, I can't have a job unless it's a mountaintop removal job." In 2014, the state prohibited surface mining at Blair Mountain. For now, but that is subject to change.
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
We're back. Happy Tuesday. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. We welcome back somebody who hasn't been on the show in a while. I'm a big fan of this guy. His name is Michael Isikoff. Michael is chief investigative. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm wrong. We're not with Michael. Oh my God, Marky Mark, and I deleted it, Miss Delete Queen that I am. Let me find it. Let me find it. Let me find it. Here we go. Sorry, you did say we're doing an extended rip from the headlines. This is what's great for all these live things. They get to see a little peek behind the curtain at Oz, right? And get to see. And I was going to say, I'm not the little man, but I am the little woman. Yes, we're going to continue with more on Ripped from the headlines. Let's do more Ripped from the headlines here on the Leslie Marshall Show. Michael, I got it, buddy. Michael will be with us second half. The New York Times reporter Michael Schmidt is releasing his new book, Donald Trump versus the United States. It's being released this week. Already there are stories that are coming out from the book, as any book does when, there's a book about the president. A lot of shocking revelations they say it contains. This was reported over the weekend. Schmidt described a debate over Jared Kushner's security clearance and the president offering General John Kelly the position as FBI director only if he pledged loyalty to Trump over the Constitution. Excerpts were released by The Times on Monday, yesterday, revealing that Vice President Mike Pence was put on, quote, standby as Trump made a trip to Walter Reed in November 2019. There was another late-night emergency visit to Walter Reed Hospital on August 1st. The reporter Don Winslow tweeted that there have been a series of these events known as mini strokes during his time in the White House. The Trump team has said nothing happened at all, and there was no late-night visit. But the new revelations prove something different happened that would have taken Trump away from being able to serve his duties as president. In response to the claim today, Trump tweeted, quote, "It never ends. Now they're trying to say that your favorite president, me, no, went to Walter Reed Medical Center having suffered a series of mini strokes." The president tweeted today, quote, "Never happened to this candidate. Fake news. Perhaps they were referring to another candidate from another party." You know what I look forward to? I don't even care if it's a Republican at this point. A grown-up in the White House. Do you know what I mean? Somebody who acts presidential and grows up. It doesn't tweet like my 12 and 13-year-olds speak. Later in the day, Trump's physician released a statement confirming the president had not suffered a stroke or a mini stroke, and also that he hadn't experienced any acute cardiovascular emergencies. Can I just say this? Having degrees in journalism 101, check your source, report the facts. And, I'm a fan of a lot of these people that are putting this information out, but you can't say any more than Joe Biden has dementia that Donald Trump suffered a mini stroke if you don't have verification by a medical professional and more than one corroborating that information to put out to the public. Just so much, because then fake news becomes fake news. You know what I mean? Then that claim that the news is fake is accurate when the news in fact is fake there. Later in the day, like I said, his physician released that statement. And he said in his statement, "I can confirm, quote, that President Trump has not experienced nor been evaluated for a cerebrovascular accident, which is a stroke, and also that he hadn't experienced any acute cardiovascular emergencies." He said, quote, "I can confirm that President Trump has not experienced nor been evaluated." And he wrote that the president asked him to release this statement. Now, neither the president nor his staff have ever said exactly why the president visited Walter Reed for a previously unannounced physical exam last fall. It could have just been a physical exam because he wasn't feeling well. Also, his brother died, and we don't know what of. And if it was COVID, maybe he was being tested. Let's rip another. Current and former national security officials are raising concerns over Attorney General William Barr's recent decision to remove the head of Justice Department's office that helps ensure federal counterterrorism and counterintelligence activities are legal, and to replace him with a political appointee with relatively limited experience. Katrina Mulligan, who worked for the Obama administration in several national security roles, and then after the inauguration of President Trump, actually joined the Office of Law and Policy in the Justice Department's National Security Division. This is somebody who knows the inside from two administrations, a Democrat and Republican. And she said, quote, "It's very alarming." Now, for much of the past decade, it's an office that not many people have known much about. It's been led by Deputy Assistant Attorney General Brad Weigman, a 23-year career public servant, not a political appointee. 2 weeks ago, the 54-year-old was told he was being reassigned and replaced with a political appointee, according to a Justice Department spokesman who is familiar with the matter. Now, Mulligan and other sources told ABC News that the new head of the office is Kellen Dwyer, 36 years of age, a cybercrimes prosecutor who actually joined the federal government 6 years ago and made international headlines in November 2018 when he accidentally revealed that federal charges had been secretly filed against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Mulligan said that given Dwyer's limited time and experience handling national security matters, he's a very odd choice to replace Weigman, who she describes as exceptional at managing government bureaucracy and resolving highly contentious matters across the government. This isn't like just a little desk job. You got to be careful who you put in this position. The timing of the personnel change just months before our election in November, in the midst of a battle against domestic terrorism and foreign interference in the election, well, it's worried current and former members of the national security community. Past chiefs of the office have served as political appointees, while others, like Weigman, served as career officials. So, quote, it would not have been that unusual early in an administration to place a political appointee in that policy role. But to do so now, see, it's more the timing of it that is very unusual, one official said. Matt Olson, the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center under the Obama administration, he agreed. He said, quote, in and of itself, it's unremarkable for Weigman's position to be filled with a political appointee, but the concern here is that you have someone who, by all accounts, has been doing a great job in a very sensitive role, and now within really just weeks of the election is replaced with somebody who's clearly viewed as more a partisan individual. ABC News pressed the Justice Department spokesman to explain why this personnel change, why the change, why now? Of course, they declined to answer. The concern from current and former officials stems from the Office of Law and Policy's role in national security. The office shapes government efforts by ensuring that new policies and executive actions don't violate federal law. Mulligan recalled telling other government officials when she was in office working on matters such as immigration, counterterrorism, and yes, Russia's interference in our elections, quote, I understand that is what you want to do, but that is illegal. She would then try to offer them alternatives that weren't illegal. So now the office is being steered by a political appointee with power to potentially influence decisions over national security policy, especially debates over what we will and won't do overseas and at home, including in terms of secret surveillance and when it isn't appropriate for the Justice Department to tell the public about election interference. So, though a relatively small unit of fewer than 24 attorneys, the Office of Law and Policy participates in almost every National Security Council meeting, works with congressional staff to draft new legislation, and conducts oversight of the FBI's intelligence gatherings and activities. We're going to take a break. We'll be back to our guest. That's what's ripping the headlines. I'm Leslie Marshall.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings.
Thanks.
For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org.
Remind me to tell you something
endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I'll the background.
Top regulatory officials in Trump's government keep chanting the same one-word mantra: deregulate, deregulate,
audio and video.
deregulate.
There you go. Okay, great.
Day after day, these agency bosses have been liberating greedy business interests to do their damnedest to us consumers, workers, the environment, and even to our chicken dinner. Yes, chicken. Instead of Kentucky Fried or tacos con pollo, they're serving up chicken a la avian leukosis. That's chicken infected with a virus that produces cancerous tumors and lesions on the birds. In July, the U.S. Agriculture Department's Food Safety and Inspection Service rubber-stamped a demand by Tyson Foods and other multi-billion-dollar meat conglomerates to deregulate chicken processing rules so they can sell chickens diseased with avian leukosis for human consumption.
Hey, I'm gonna add Leslie to this call, and I think we should be good.
Would not even be burdened by having to put a right to know
label. Everything looks good. You might want to angle it slightly. Yeah, there you go. Actually, just
always,
slightly down. Perfect.
The industry line
That's
is
great.
It's perfectly safe.
Just
Trust
adding
us.
Leslie to this call.
No. Their claim is that slaughterhouse line workers can simply cut out any tumors they see, then process the rest of the animal. There are two problems with this claim. First, avian leukosis can be a systemic disease passing through the blood, so slicing
You'll hear the
tumors
radio
doesn't
feed in a
necessarily
second once I
eliminate
have
the
her on.
virus.
Yes.
Second, line workers don't have time to see tumors, much less remove
Hey,
them.
can you hang
Since
up?
Trump's
I'm trying to call you.
regulators
I've got Michael
have also
on
allowed
a different
poultry
call, so I'm
factories
trying to add you to
speed
that
up
one. So
their
if you hang
processing
up,
lines
then...
to 175 birds per
Okay, so
minute.
I'm going to call you now.
This means each worker
add you
handles up
to
to 3
this call
chickens
that I'm
a
on
second.
with Michael.
As Lyndon Johnson used to say about such political hokum, they can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. To learn more, go to Food and Water Watch, foodandwaterwatch.org.
Okay, let me know if it's ringing. Just calling Leslie Marshall. See that? You don't see anything on your screen? Do you see something green that says go to call? Anything? Yes, join the call. There we go. Okay, beautiful. Leslie, let me give you the feed, okay? Because we're coming in.
Of interviewing Michael and David shortly after the book was released. It's an absolute must read. Go to Amazon.com now or after the show or during the commercial break and follow Michael on Twitter. His handle is @Isikoff, ISIKOFF. Michael, thank you for joining us. Happy Tuesday and good to have you back on the show.
Great to be back, Leslie.
A lot of things to talk about today. First of all, there's a lot of rhetoric from the left and from the right about what's going on in our nation. And Elizabeth Newman, a former assistant secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who actually specializes in domestic terrorism, said the Trump administration is allowing right-wing extremists to, quote, start a race war. I want you to comment on this. I remember in college, Michael, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, that my professor said to me, to the class, every great empire falls and the United States will fall. And I predict it will fall because of a race war. And I thought he's smoking a lot more weed than all of us were at that time. And but maybe he's not so wrong. Are right-wing extremists starting a race war in this country, because there are a lot of people out there that think that all of the violence comes from the left and from a so-called Antifa organization that people have membership cards in, which is obviously not true.
Right. And as a matter of fact, we actually had Elizabeth Newman on Skullduggery on Friday.
Awesome.
And she's a fascinating individual, lifelong Republican, pro-life, mother, and clearly concerned citizen who was serving in the Trump administration until just last April. And left very much concerned about the drift in the Trump administration, the lack of attention to what she was trying to warn about, which is domestic terrorism from white supremacy groups, from neo-Nazis, from the right. And what she said was that the White House had no interest in talking about this. They got into, and this was fascinating, they actually got into a semantic battle where Elizabeth, who was the Assistant Secretary at Homeland Security for Threat Prevention and Policy, was trying to launch an initiative to fight domestic terrorism, but the White House didn't want to use that phrase because it conjured up images of right-wing extremists, and they did not want attention on that. And it reminded me, and I brought this up with Elizabeth, remember back 4 years ago when people in the Trump world and Republicans were attacking the Obama White House for not using the phrase radical Islamic terrorism. Yeah. They were making the point that if you can't define what the enemy is, then you can't combat it. And this is an analogy to that. This is a parallel in the same way. The Trump White House does not want to define that we have or accept that we have a domestic terrorism problem in this country. So they want to call it something else. Now, look, I think this is a complicated issue. Clearly we see these caravans of right-wing extremists going to Portland to combat the Black Lives Matter protests, and that is certainly contributing to the violence. But to be fair, there is elements of violence on all sides here.
Correct.
And in Washington, D.C., you had our mayor, Bowser, expressing concern just yesterday about the violence coming from those Black Lives Matter protesters downtown, saying that they are the DC police are arresting outsiders coming in to Washington, D.C. to participate in these protests. And she was complaining that the U.S. Attorney's office in Washington, with a U.S. attorney appointed by William Barr, isn't being aggressive enough in prosecuting those individuals. So I think that there's plenty to be concerned about on all sides here.
Absolutely. You mentioned that Elizabeth Newman was with the Trump administration. She did resign just recently in April of this year. You mentioned that Correct. She was on Friday on your Yahoo News podcast, Skullduggery. And in that podcast with you, she discussed her dissatisfaction specifically with how the speakers at the Republican National Convention described Black Lives Matters protesters. Let's talk about that. What was her concern and why? Because obviously there was criticism from the right that the Democrats didn't talk about the violence, criticism from the left that the Republicans were, really making Black Lives Matter sound like some kind of a criminal or threatening or terrorist, if you will, organization, clearly muddying the waters in that message.
Right. Look, there is a lot of painting with broad brushes here. And what Trump and his campaign is trying to do is sort of portray Black Lives Matter all in the context of particular groups that are radical that do call for revolution, that do call for defunding the police. But clearly, we all know that the broader Black Lives Matter movement is one that resonates with citizens across the board here, and people who don't share the radical agenda of the group that calls itself that, but still will proudly walk under the banner of Black Lives Matter because the message is more powerful than the particular agenda of a group that uses that name. So I think we do have to be very careful when the Trumpites try to portray all who are marching to the movement of Black Lives Matter as radicals who share that agenda.
The speakers at the Republican National Convention portrayed the cities with the ongoing protest, highlighting these are Democratic-run states or Democratic-run cities. These are lawless. And I just want to point out to people there are statistics that are there's a demographic statistic for that because cities tend to be more diverse. More diverse communities tend to vote more Democratic, so that you see in the urban areas and in the cities, in the metropolises, as opposed to the suburbs, more Democratic voters than Republican voters. But clearly, there was not a mention of the white supremacist escalating to violence during the demonstrations. And I know that Elizabeth called those portrayals, quote, completely a sideshow to distract from the real threat. So talk to us about the real threat. And on the tail of that, playing devil's advocate, these are conventions where everybody's going to say, if you want to get into office, the country sucks, let me make it better, from, Democrats. And Republicans, right. The country's great. Politically, it's not going to be advantageous for them to talk about this real threat.
Right. And look,
and Michael, and I apologize, Michael, we're up against a break. Let's take a break. I don't want to interrupt you. I want you to answer that in full. So just think about it, marinate on that. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with our guest. We're talking about how there are many people, including one former Department of Homeland Security official, who said that Trump is letting right-wing extremists start a race war. We're going to talk more about that, because what you're seeing and what you're often hearing in the media is that this is all the Democrats' fault, the left's fault, it's the protesters, and that's not the real picture. That's not the truth, and avoiding the truth could be very dangerous for our nation and for our future, regardless of who and what party you're a part of and who you support. I'm Leslie Marshall. We're going to be back with our guest in just a moment, Michael Isikoff, Chief Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News, co-host of the Skullduggery podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Isikoff, ISIKOFF. Back after this. Don't go away.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council. America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
He was the heart of your family, and he taught you our history. He helped you fix your first flat. He was the best backyard DJ around. And every time he'd tell a story, he'd own the room. But now more than ever, he may feel alone. Today, older adults and their loved ones are struggling to connect in a time when connection has never been more important. But there is something we can do. Embrace our older loved ones through StoryCorps Connect. With StoryCorps Connect, you can honor seniors remotely with an interview about their life. Every interview will be archived at the Library of Congress, becoming part of American history, so that years from now, future generations can listen in.
All right, Grandpa, what's one piece of advice you have for me?
Just 3 words, sweetheart. Live with courage. The man that had the best stories still has plenty of stories to tell. So connect virtually and share the conversation of a lifetime at StoryCorps Connect.org/AARP. Connect, honor, share. StoryCorps Connect. A message from AARP, StoryCorps, and the Ad Council.
I'm Brenda Gazzar, the host of Code WAC, your podcast on the state of America's broken healthcare system and how Medicare for All could help. Here's what we're talking about this time. Today, we'll talk about the driving factors of women experiencing homelessness. Amy Turk is the Chief Executive Officer of the Downtown Women's Center, the only organization in Los Angeles focused exclusively on serving and empowering women experiencing homelessness. Welcome to Code WAC, Amy.
So nice of you to join us. What are the main reasons that women experience homelessness today?
The main reason that we find homelessness in general is obviously a lack of enough funding to afford housing, and then systems that unfortunately disproportionately impact mostly people of color in negative ways. But for women, it's usually an experience of gender-based violence that could lead to homelessness, or the impacts of typically making less money in general than men. And of course, that's more true for women of color. And just the compounding impacts of not being able to add to your wealth over time has left many older women in particular either vulnerable to homelessness or homeless themselves. I work with, many women that have unfortunately experienced domestic violence or sexual assaults or even child abuse. And in reports that we've produced at the Downtown Women's Center, most recently our 2019 LA City Women's Needs Assessment, over 50% of the women said that they had experienced domestic violence over the course of their lifetime.
Thank you, Amy. Find more Code WAC episodes on progressivevoices.com and on the PV app. You can also listen to Code WAC at heal-ca.org. This podcast is powered by Heal California, uplifting the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. I'm Brenda Gazzar.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
We're back. Happy Tuesday. When I say we, I'm Leslie Marshall. I'm hosting here and interviewing Michael Isikoff. Michael is Chief Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News. He's co-host of the Skullduggery podcast with Daniel Klaidman, and he co-authored the book with David Korn, bestseller, Russian Roulette, The Inside Story of Putin's War on America and the Election of Donald Trump. 5-star reviewed on Amazon.com. Get a copy. 1,500 reviews. You could be 1,501. Follow him on Twitter at Isikoff, Isikoff. I want to tell you also about another podcast this busy man has. It's called the Conspiracy Land Podcast. Season 2 is coming next week. If you follow Michael on Twitter, again, that handle is at Isikoff, Isikoff. For more details, you can get in on this new podcast or the new season starting next week, Conspiracy Land. That's another Yahoo News podcast that Michael will be hosting, and we're glad to have him with us today. Michael, thank you for holding. Welcome back. I had asked you before the break about the sideshow that Elizabeth Newman on your podcast Friday, Skullduggery, one of your two podcasts, another Yahoo News podcast, spoke of when the RNC completely brushed over instances of white supremacists escalating to violence during those demonstrations. And she called it, quote, completely a sideshow to distract from the real threat. Two things I asked you were, one, to talk about that real threat, and two, but isn't that what conventions do? Paint their situation, their party, and the nation in a better and very unrealistic, perhaps, light.
Yeah, well, look, Elizabeth Newman made a very simple point that if you just look at the number of terrorist acts in this country committed by white supremacists and neo-Nazis and extremists on the right, the death toll, the injury toll is far greater than in recent years it has been on the left, whether you go back to Dylan Roof, to Tree of Life Synagogue attack in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh, to El Paso, I mean, there have been a number of attacks that have been bloody and fatal, that have caused great harm. And this is the issue that Elizabeth Newman was trying to get the Trump administration to focus on when she was at the Department of Homeland Security. And as she portrays it, this fell on deaf ears. I mean, look, she said it's worse than that because, she points back to the president's comments after Charlottesville, find people on both sides. And she says, rhetoric like that, no matter exactly what the president was referring to, no matter how you parse it and you look at other things he said that seems to modify it, when you use words like that, find people on both sides, you are sending a message. You are giving permission to people who do share those extremist views to go out there and do what they want to do.
Yeah, very, very true. She said on your podcast, there are multiple arrests that the FBI has conducted in the last few months at these peaceful protests where you have right-wing extremists coming in, trying to take advantage of the cover of the protest to carry out these violent acts, and they're trying to start a race war. Are we in the media, are journalists, talking heads, being irresponsible and not putting out more of the facts? Example, in Portland, the federal government stated that 0 arrests that they had made, and there were hundreds, were linked to any, quote, Antifa organization. Yet the president would say, it's Antifa. And there is this vision of some people maybe who aren't, pro-Trumpers even, who are fearful of some of, what is to come, the burning of our streets and cities in America with the fear-mongering from the right, that really believe there is this Antifa organization, and Antifa is doing this to Portland. Antifa could come and do it to their city. Don't we have a responsibility to right the wrong and to, in a sense, not just fact check, but put those facts out there as louder than the misleading lies and propaganda?
We absolutely have a responsibility to report the facts and report what's going on the ground. What I find uncomfortable about the discussion of this is the degree to which it has been politicized. That if you are that the people on the right refuse to talk about right-wing extremism, people on the left don't want to talk about left-wing radicalism. And, as a result, each tries to deny the reality that there is, violence and extreme views on both sides. Clearly, I think Elizabeth Newman makes the point that if you just look at, the level of violence on the right, it's greater than the level on violence on the left. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist on both sides. And I think we are seeing, at the same time, we are also seeing a real spike in shootings and homicides in major American cities. And, we had on Skullduggery a couple of weeks ago during the Democratic convention, Debbie Dingell, Democratic Congresswoman from outside Detroit. And she was warning that the violence in the cities is and the criticism of police, the defund the police cries, is cutting in her district. And remember, Michigan was so close last time, and Trump took it. And this really struck me because I remember talking to Debbie Dingell at the Democratic convention in Philadelphia in 2016, and she was saying the trade issue was really cutting in Trump's favor, and that Hillary was in trouble in Michigan. Very few people were talking that way at that time. She turned out to be right. And what she told us during the Democratic convention this year is that she was concerned that the law enforcement and violence issue could be the new trade issue in Michigan. So, I just throw that out there saying that, there are reasons to be concerned about this. And there are reasons that Biden, I think, is starting to address it, because I think he realizes that, the right-wing extremism notwithstanding, that he cannot be portrayed or put in that corner where he seems to be ignoring violence in the cities.
Yeah, without a doubt, they are. Um, and another thing is, I mean, FBI has even said, over the years, even prior to this, that white supremacist and that extremism, that domestic terrorism, or the threat of that domestic terrorism, there were far more cases and concerns than that of fundamental radical Islamic,
Right.
terrorism. She even said on your podcast, it is not Antifa. The most dire threat is right wing extremism.
Yeah.
Members of white supremacist organizations have been tied to violence at protests that have grown common in cities across the U.S. in recent months. As of July 16th, there have been 19 instances of people driving cars through crowds of protesters. Only 8 were charged, by the way. And she said, quote, "We need to have an honest discussion with the American people about the nature of this threat." I agree with her 100%. Quite
Right,
frankly,
right.
if we would just be honest about it, it would reduce the ability for people to be recruited, because I think a lot of people, she said, don't appreciate what is happening when they are being recruited. And that's a
Yeah.
very good point. I've been saying all week, when the right pushes back to me on TV and whatever, look, electing Donald Trump or Joe Biden isn't going to make this go away. We have to address the underlying reason and cause of all of this. And if we don't do that, this won't go away.
Let me just throw out another element to this. The FBI has declared that the QAnon conspiracy cult is a domestic terrorism threat. And I don't know how much you've talked about on your show about just how wacky and bizarre this conspiracy cult is, but the absolutely crazy things that they are pushing out there and propagating is mind blowing. And yet this is it's really not an organization, it's some sort of cult that Donald Trump refuses to walk away from. You had a QAnon follower who just won that Georgia House GOP primary and then was at the White House last week for the acceptance speech. QAnon is a group we're going to deal with in this new season of Conspiracy Land. And so it's very much on my mind right now. So that is an example of really extremist rhetoric, bizarre conspiracy theorizing, something that the FBI has warned about, and yet the White House refuses to distance itself from it.
Absolutely. We are out of time. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about the halting the in-person election briefings, the Intel chief's move to do that.
Next time.
But next time, we will have you back, Michael. Thank you, and congrats on the second podcast, Yahoo News Conspiracy Land, in addition to Skullduggery, the other Yahoo News podcast, and your book. Just awesome. Love you. Have a great day. Be safe. I'm Leslie Marshall. Have a great rest of the day, everybody out there in the world. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Cool.